So myself and Nick are co-founders of Carbon Calling. So alongside Nick's husband Reno and also the host farmer Tim. So our ambition was to have the first conference in August of this year with Joel Salatin coming to come and speak to us. Obviously, we're still in a watching brief situation, so a final decision about that will be made mid-June. So we thought in the time of lockdown and also with some uncertainty about whether the first conference will happen this year or next year, we thought we'd sort of try out these live chats. So this is number 3, entitled Building Soil. So in terms of we'll introduce the farmers now, and then we'll sort of talk about the themes that we're going to pick up this evening. So on the call this evening, we've got Mike Powley, who's a beef and arable farmer in Yorkshire. So Mike's journey has been in the sort of 5 years ago, he went over to America and visited Gabe Brown's farm and sort of came home. He was already thinking that how he was planning to change his business, but that was sort of the catalyst to where he is now. So we'll hear a bit more about him, but certainly a bit more on the arable side than previous calls, but certainly the beef animals are very important to his business. Nick, do you want to talk about the Brewsters?
Yeah, so Bob and Andrew Brewster farm in Angus, not Fife, that I put on Twitter. They are quite young, really. I'm thinking they are quite young, and they're doing. They would be they're doing true mob grazing, and they're not on Twitter, but we came about them. They've developed a WhatsApp group on pasture cropping, and Reno was really into all that. So we found them via that. They've got also a great website, and they've just got a really good mindset, and they're really open and up for learning about stuff, not just in this country but all around the world, which we'll learn about. Yeah.
And so what we're sort of thinking about this evening is both of the Brewsters and Mike are very much coming from the point of building up soil. They're coming from it from different angles, which is in itself is quite interesting. But I think it's so the first sort of main theme is we'll be talking a bit about how they are approaching that, so how they're building soil, and to quote one of the Brewsters, which is they're no longer hearing the worms scream. We'll also think from their systems, both Mike and the Brewsters have a slightly different way in terms of how they're breeding the animals that are fit for their system. So we'll talk a bit about cows. We're also looking sort of at how because of how they're doing, how their systems are being run, what is the benefits in terms of the wider environment. And we'll also look at, and it's sort of been touched upon from the WhatsApp group, and some of the also Michael talk about some of the groups he's involved in, which is the key part of all of this, and I suppose why all of us are on a call on a Tuesday afternoon, is the social support element, that it's really important that we share and exchange information with other people from a wide range of other systems. So that's what we're going to sort of touch upon this evening, but as previous calls suggest, that it could go in other places as well. As I mentioned, if you want to ask a question as we go through, please feel free via the chat button, and then I'll bring them in as and when they're necessary, and we'll go from there.
Liz, we're just having a few comments about your sound. I'm thinking, do you maybe need to put your earphones in?
Oh, that might be. Can you not hear me at all?
Well, you're just a bit in the and outy. Oh, I can't hear you at all now.
Well, this evening. Is that any better?
Yes, I think so. Let me have a look. Can you put on the chat if that's any better?
Just so any, I'm hoping that is better. So Nick, in this, while we're testing my mic, what have you been up to in the last 2 weeks? Anything exciting?
Well, I think I've been on a bit of a downer. We had a really busy lambing, and you kind of keep going just on tiredness and crunching up cornflakes, and then you come down, and it's all been I found it quite hard, and I think I was quite enjoying lockdown, and now I'm desperate to meet my mates and get really drunk. But today you and I had this talk with 2 people about dung beetles.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting here now smelling of poo because I've been going.
Got it. I can't hardly hear it.
So hang on, do we need to mute?
I can't see who is unmuted.
See, this
Keep
is what
going.
Joseph normally does.
Yeah.
So the
It's not me, is it, Nick?
Yes.
Reno, Sid, go away. Sorry, that's Reno in the other room. Oh, Reno.
They're on speaking. Yeah. Sorry. Okay, bye.
Sorry, Nick.
Sorry, everyone. So in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have these people on, and plus a farmer who I hope's on the call now, Bruce.
Grab me charger, Catherine. I panic. Just need that long lead from up there, or a long lead.
Can you please remember to mute your mics as you come in? Wait a minute. Okay. Sorry, Nick. Keep going.
Sorry. This is the joys of this. So in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have probably the leading expert in the UK on dung beetles coming to talk to us with a farmer from Ireland, Bruce, who's hopefully on the call. And it was a real eye-opener today. Liz and I talked for an hour and a half, didn't we, about dung beetles. And I think they are the missing link in lots of soil stuff. And we're really quite excited in a kind of sad way to get these people in front of you all. Because I think counting worms, I think we all talk about counting worms, but I think in the future, counting dung beetles will be another thing we just do. So what we're asking you to do is, Liz, we haven't really talked about this. Are we just going to get people to go out and take photos of their dung beetles?
Yeah, so we're pulling together some protocols in the next couple of weeks as to how you can identify, or basically how can you find and get some photos of some dung beetles and challenge these people to identify them. So that's part of the plan. But in the next couple of weeks via Twitter, we'll put out some protocols in terms of how you go about capturing dung beetles before they can then identify them.
Yeah, because I think they are the missing link. So should we talk to these farmers, do you think?
Yeah, and to link through actually to the Brewsters, which we talked a bit about your system, which we'll hear about in a second, and they've got very excited. So they might come up and visit you.
I have told them that.
So yeah, in terms of from hopefully Mike and the Brewsters, are you happy to unmute yourself, or and then we'll get ready for the call?
Yeah, we're all ready to go. Good evening.
Perfect. Hello, Mike. Are you there too?
Yeah, hi Liz, how you doing?
Marvellous. Better than us. So in terms of, should we go to Mike first? So can you just give us a bit of an introduction to your farm and what you're how you're currently farming it, really? Just a bit about your farm at the minute.
Okay, so I'm farming about 320 acres at the moment. A third of it's owned, the rest of it's rented, number of different landlords, lots of different parcels of land all over the place. Running a 90 cow suckle herd, everything through to finished to fat. Went to America a number of years ago to meet Gabe Brown and Joel and one or two other guys with the intention of improving our soils further, which is the story about tonight. Yeah, our journey from there really. So the basic farm is about half grass, half arable, no-till, conservation tillage type arable side of things, and how we integrate the cropping and the grass in the arable rotation to improve the soil, and also techno-grazing the cows to improve the grass quality and utilisation of grass on the grazing platform.
Perfect, thank you. So same question to the Brewsters.
Oh, you need to mute yourselves.
There we go. You got me now?
Yeah.
We're up in Angus, up not far from above Dundee, and we farm in the Sidlaw Hill range. And we farm roughly about 900 acres, ranging from Heather Hill right down to sort of arable ground over sort of one whole.
I may have just made an issue, which is I've just accidentally muted you. It's not going well. You may have to unmute. I was looking for people to mute. I apologise.
I must have been speaking rubbish again.
No, it was my fault.
So I think the unusual thing about us for the area is a lot of farms, our type in the area, have gone away from livestock and into cropping, mainly spring barley, ploughing everything they can and growing spring barley, whereas we've gone away from any arable cropping other than the pasture cropping, which is a new thing, but we'll go to that, let's talk about that in a minute. We've gone generally away from being a mixed farm and more just a livestock farm, but specialising in cattle more than anything else. And over the last 10 years, we really got into rotational grazing, and then we became aware of the mob grazing, how we could actually use it to build soils. About, so the system's really evolved into specialising in cattle and mob grazing, and sort of having to update all the infrastructure in terms of fences and watering to support running large groups of cattle. And it's become really quite exciting in terms of building soil, but also the sort of wildlife benefits and how much easier the cattle positives that we never envisaged.
And also you are in your long-term organic, aren't you, as well? That farm's
been...
that's
right. Yeah, I missed that out. Yeah. The farms. I think the first of the farms started to go organic in the early 90s, and the last of the farm to go organic was about 15 years ago. So the whole farm's been organic for 15 years anyway.
Can you just explain why, like in 1990, when when you first went organic, what I'm assuming that was your mum and dad, and what made them make that move? Because they wouldn't have been normal, would it, back then?
I'm sure there's loads. I don't know when the first farm started to go proper certified organic with the Soil Association, but mum and dad were certainly 1990 was when they started. But that was really mum believed and dad believed as well in sort of producing healthy food, where we're sort of pouring down chemicals on food and then people are eating that. So that was kind of their motivations to go organic.
Yeah. Okay.
And as we've done in the last call, which is we've got some photos to share as well. So what I can do now, Mike, is just put up the ones on sort of in terms of your sort of journey to the, I'm going to stop when I use the word journey, your visit to the UK for the US in terms of, and this is the sort of what we're classing as the epiphany moment, more jargon from me, but in terms of what led to your sort of change of thinking. It should be up shortly. There we go. Is that there?
Can't see it at the moment. What have we got first?
Yep.
There we go.
Yep.
Yeah, so we visited Gabe's in 2015, I think it was, in the autumn, so harvest time. They were just getting into their maize harvest. When we arrived at Gabe's, I don't know if when we arrived at Gabe's, he basically said that we can go anywhere on the farm, do whatever we like. He gave me that trenching spade you can see in the right and left hand side picture and said just dig a hole wherever you want, just keep looking at the soil. That was the important thing as far as he was concerned, to get over the message. So this is the neighbour's field. This had a sunflower crop on it. The sunflowers were about 4 inches in diameter and they should have been like dinner plate size. It was the third crop the neighbour had tried to plant in that field that year. The previous two had been washed out. There was a 20-acre pond in that field that had been there all summer. So I had the spade, so I started digging, and that hole's probably 4 or 5 inches deep, 6 inches maybe, and it took me sort of 6 attempts to get that deep down. The soil, as you can see in the left hand and the right hand picture particularly, was very, very compacted, literally micro layers within those clods you can see there, and completely impenetrable to water. No sign of any life at all, so no worm casts on top, no worm middens, that type of thing. It just looked like a barren desert, and obviously the crop was pretty much failing on its feet, really. They'd had a fairly ordinary sort of a summer but a wet spring, so hence they had the problem with the basically soil sort of just running together and no infiltration at all.
And then this is what you saw on Gabe's.
Yeah, so these pictures here of Gabe's, these are probably about 50 meters away from those first pictures. And this is what Gabe describes as his black cottage cheese. So he wants the texture of the soil to be like black cottage cheese, so you can see the individual granulations within it. The structure was phenomenal. Bear in mind, this is the same base soil substrate as the neighbour's soil. This has been in no-till for, I think it was on the home farm, so this was probably no-till from when he started, sort of 15 years ago, whenever it was. And the difference, as you can see, was absolutely shocking, really. Just unbelievable how different two soils from the same parent material could be. And when you dug them up, there was worms, there was beetles, there was symphilids, there was all sorts of creeper crawlies. I'm not an entomologist, I don't know what they all were.
That's in 2 weeks.
Yeah, there was life forever just running around in among this soil on top of the soil. And Gabe's infiltration rates were off the scale. I think the USDA recommended, was it an inch of infiltration a minute or something, or an hour? Or was it inch and a half an hour? I can't remember what their standard was. And Gabe was sort of saying, well, last time they came, they did 16 inches and they couldn't, it just ran through the soil. So you can imagine with a soil structure like that, and it was deep. You can see the trenching spade in the top left corner there. That's a 18-inch long trenching spade. So you could stick it in 9-10 inches down. It was like that all the way down.
Mike, for those listening who are aware, well, I'm assuming a lot of people will know Gabe, but for those who don't, how would you describe him?
A very thought-provoking guy. We were there all day, and I don't think he stopped. He paused for breath occasionally, but he just talked all day. Very, very knowledgeable guy. He'd started on this journey through taking over the farm and having no money for a number of years. So literally, he could buy nothing but seed. So he just stuck the seeds in the ground and harvested whatever was there. And that the transformation began, and he actually had the ability to sort of look at what was happening and try and gauge it. That was the important thing. It was being able to realize that something different was happening. And bear in mind, that long ago, conservation agriculture and regenerative agriculture hadn't been invented. So he was right at the forefront of it. He had nobody to go and speak to or learn from. So it was purely his observations that he went on to start with. Talking to him now, he says that he regenerates topsoils in a very different manner. But his core principles are what he sticks to. So a living root in the soil all the time, soil armor, no chemical input if possible.
If we go back to that armor, which is on that photo, just talk through the armor kind of.
Yes, I can't remember what that crop was. It might have been, was it a sorghum crop that? So by soil armor, what he means basically is crop residue. We would call it crop residue. So they've gone through that field with the combine and I think it was sorghum. So they harvested their grain and basically chopped all the rest of it and threw it out the back of the combine. And that's what he wants to see. They've got more extreme of temperatures over there. So they're down to, I don't know, minus 15, whatever it was, and plus 40 odd during the summer. So he wants that soil armor to protect the soil, to keep the temperature higher during the winter and lower during the summer. And especially during the summer, he doesn't want any, he wants a minimum amount of evaporation from the soil. So that soil armor basically keeps a really strong sun off it. So it has a protective mode, if you like, but also it then gives an environment for all of those creeper crawlies, the sort of the more mobile sort of soil biology, if you like, to live in. So if you scraped it apart, there was spiders, there was beetles, there was symphilids, there was, say, just stuff that I don't know what they were, but there was lots of them anywhere you looked. And that was that was 150 acre field, and we walked sort of across the corner of it, and everywhere you looked, they were there. There were billions and billions of soil biology creatures in that soil. Unbelievable amount. Another thing about soil armor is that's the food for all that soil biology, whether it be single cells, funguses and bacteria, right through to the sort of the apex predators that you'll find in the soil. So that feeds the soil. And he was saying that, bear in mind, this was about October, November we went there. he was saying that by March, the soil biology will pull all of that soil armor into the ground. It'll be bare ground. And that was something that he was really disappointed with, because he wants soil armor all the time. But his soil biology was so virile that it was going to have all that for dinner and have it in the ground by March. It was quite incredible. And, you know, I've no reason to doubt him. He was a genuine, honest guy. I'm sure if we went back in March and walked into that field, that will be the case.
Yeah. Wowzers. Yeah, no, it's all good.
And then in terms of, so that's sort of where you had your moment in standing in a field. So then in terms of talking about from sort of, as I mentioned before, you were starting to have a sort of thinking that what you were doing wasn't quite right, and that just helped you sort of moved it quicker, didn't it? And then so sort of just talk us through what you did and what you now do.
Yeah, so the picture there top left is what we used to do. So we'd always employed low ground pressure, so we were down to about, I don't know, 6 or 8 psi with those tires on that tractor, but we were still power harrowing, drilling, ploughing and pressing and things. It just, the soil had got to the stage where I just didn't feel it needed the power harrow. So often I was power harrowing with 1000 PTO power harrowing 540 on low revs. I was doing not much more than stirring it round. Didn't need to fill the wheel marks in, because it didn't leave any wheel marks because of the tires, which was great. So you could cover a huge area in a day, but it just seemed like we were overworking the soil all the time. And this was arable ground that we were putting muck onto nearly every year, but obviously ploughing it down. So it's not as available to the soil biology, really. It tends to go in as a thin layer of 9 inches down, however deep you're ploughing it. So it wasn't really, I didn't think we were improving the soil. We were in terms of its workability. It was easier to work down every year, which compared to a lot of the arable ground in this country down in the sort of southeast and around Cambridgeshire, they're having more and more difficulty working it down because they're losing the organic matter. It was getting better and better. Having been to Gabe's in October, November time, the following season, I bought the Moores Unidrill, which is the top right-hand picture. So that's a single disc drill with a coulter just sat behind the offset 7-degree offset disc. It's got a tire press on the front, 2 coulters and 2 press wheels behind. It's the same principle that the new Sky drills work on. They've basically bought the patent for that system, so it's exactly the same as the new Sky drills. And that picture there behind the drill, that's drilled. So that's how much soil disturbance I'm now doing. And the picture at the bottom with father and the dog, that's the crop I was drilling in that field. So,
and to clarify, your dad is quite tall, so that's a decent crop. Yeah,
that's a pretty decent crop. His dad's 6'2", and that's a 47 kilo German Shepherd. Fairly big lump of dog. Very good for judging crop sizes. So he's my soil expert. He knows all there is to know about soils, because he's listened to me talking about it enough times when we're showing people around. So if you like that, the 2 pictures there just show the difference. In that first picture, in the second picture, rather, the back of the drill, on the left-hand side, that's a field of spring beans, which again was established with that Unidrill. So we've drilled everything with that since we came back from America.
And that would have been sprayed out, so glyphosate would be used within that. You would be using glyphosate prior to that drilling.
Yeah, so that's winter barley stubble. So I don't think the crop had any glyphosate pre-harvest and none post-harvest. So there was no glyphosate on that field, that harvest. But depending on the ripeness, the evenness, the ripeness of the crop, we try not to use Roundup if we can. And often putting the cover crops in, we don't use Roundup because we want to try and encourage any natural regeneration as well. So if you look at where the dog is, there's a patch there with some volunteer barley in, and the patch where the dog sat is a bit of a control. So every time we go and drill something, I always leave a bit in the corner of the field somewhere just to give me a reality check and make sure that the cover crop is doing what we think it is. It's not that I ran out of seed. You've got to understand.
Of course not.
Yeah.
And then there's just a few more pictures of sort of drill in different environments. But yeah, in terms of just talking, but it's the bit that's amazing is that how it can deal with such a variety of different, I suppose, fields or.
Yeah, most of our ground is sort of sandy loams or sandy clay loams or clay loams. So the picture there on the left-hand side, it basically I wasn't sure how we were going to deal with it with the FIM that we had on the farm. So that had been taken out of the shed, been stood in the field for probably a fortnight, 3 weeks, and then just blitzed out of a standard vertical beater muck spreader. The trouble is I've got at the moment is finding a spreader that'll really spread it nice and wide, so we don't put too many wheelings in. But we don't do any soil disturbance at all. So that's winter wheat, that's gravity going into bean stubble, having had muck put on it as well. So I basically did some tests across the field. It varied from 10 to 25 ton an acre. And no matter what there was in the field, the drill just dealt with it. And then on the right-hand side, that's a cover crop that was actually used for a shoot. And we took the ground back on in the autumn and drilled wheat into it. So that was most of the cover crop was as high as the tractor bonnet. For those that are really observant, you realise there's two different tractors there, but we've just gone to the one on the left-hand side now with the bigger lower ground pressure tyres, so I can work at 8 or 10 psi with that tractor drilling, so I'm not leaving a mark in that field. And the establishment is fantastic. No problems on headlands. We have full fields of crops. That's one thing I was sort of concerned about, whether we'd have to do any remedial on the headlands, but it seems not really. So
Mike, as far as kit goes, how much have you been able to de-kit?
Well, that drill is it now.
That's it.
Yeah, so there's no. I've still got my worm chopper or power harrow, as most people call them. Still got that, which we use for remedial jobs. If we take a new bit of land on, it needs a bit of sorting out or leveling out or whatever. But I just drill with that now. So I've got that, if you like, that tractor, that drill. I've got a flat trailer to cart straw on and a bulk 10-ton bulk trailer to move the grain off with, and that's about all you need really, and a fert spreader and a sprayer. You could de-kit to that extent. So I've still got the power harrow because it sends me very little on the books, and it's handy occasionally. The drill's gone. The plough is still in the shed, but that's not turned up for 4 or 5 years. But again, if we take some land on that needs ploughing, I'm not adverse to doing it. So we took on some land this time that was had been probably the worst case scenario for soil, really. So it had been potatoes and maize for the last 7 or 8 years. So it had some real hammerings over the wet winters. So we'd been through that twice with a sumo at an angle to the drilling and then drilled straight into that with some spring barley this time. So I'm not adverse to going in and sorting a problem out. I'd rather do that and sort it out quickly and hit the ground running rather than spend 4 or 5 years waiting for a crop or a radish or whatever to bust a pan or a subsoil for me.
So I've just jumped over. So that's just some other sort of tractor porn, for want of a better phrase, of wheat going into sprayed off grass and also wheat going into a 5-year lay. So again, just showing its versatility, I suppose. But
yeah,
and then
a couple of things there really. The fact is, let the tires. Don't be afraid to let the tires down. You got to, if you're going to do this, do it properly. So we've got some Michelin Zia bibs on that now. The previous one, the gearbox went bang, so that's what Case sent me as a replacement, which was very nice of them. And you can see on the drill there, the press wheels on the front, the disc halters and the press wheels at the back. So it's a really simple system. There's not a lot to go wrong. It's a sulky metering system, air distribution to the coulters. It is as basic as it can get, really. We don't run any sort of RDS or guidance systems. I just sort of drive in a straight line as best I can. And the stuff on the right hand side there, that was a 5-year lay. There was probably 4 or 5 inches of fairly tight grass lay there. So that we sprayed off a Roundup, a lot of docks in it as well, and just drilled straight into it. And if you flick onto the next pictures, that was the result of the drilling.
So that's in the 5-year lay.
So yeah, that's into 5-year lay, and that's the way the sort of crop established. So you've got to get your head around the fact that it isn't going to look like a conventional field or a conventional crop. You're just going to have these lines up and down, and all your neighbours start asking you, "Sorry, what are you doing in there?" "I've drilled it." "Oh, what do you mean you drilled it?" "Aren't you going to plough it?" No, it's finished now, and that's the difference. It's finished. So I can now drill in an hour and a half what used to take me all day to plough and power harrow.
So it's a combination of you've reduced your your machinery cost significantly, and also time, or your ability to cover more land, I suppose.
Time is the biggest thing. That's the time is the thing that none of us have got enough of. It's finite in your working year. So if I can go out there and drill 40 acres a day on half a tank of juice, compared to going and ploughing 10 acres a day and then going back and picking the combi up and doing it that way, and having the tractor working hard and blowing an awful lot of diesel up the spout, that's fine. But the ultimate important thing to me is the fact that it's good for the soil. That's why I'm doing it. I'm not the cost saving and the time saving are additional benefits, but it's all about that soil. So that 5-year lay there, I think, if I remember rightly, sort of the experts estimate that if you have your grass down in an arable situation for 3 to 5 years, you will be halfway to a permanent pasture soil structure. So after 3 to 5 years, you've improved the soil hugely, and there's a fantastic soil structure there. If you go out and dig a hole in a grass field, that's basically what it looks like. So you sort of start to think, well, why would I want to go in there and plough that up and bury all that good stuff on the top there and all of that soil structure and all the worm's hard work and just break it all up, when you can go and drill into it? The till's already there because of the fibrous root system of the grass, and as you can see, that established very well. And we have a rolling average at the moment of, I haven't worked it out for the sort of last 3 or 4 years. I would have thought we'd be doing, I don't know, 4 1/4, 4 1/3 ton on average of winter wheat. So there's often a changeover or a yield dip if you're in an arable rotation and you haven't got any grass in there. But what I find is that either this grass or the red clover that we put in for 3 years, that gives a really good entry into the no-till. The grass starts to structure there. There we go. Spot on cue. So that's the third year that's the third year of that lay, and that's the third cut during the summer from it. So no nitrogen fertilizer, no intervention apart from mowing it. So we try and mow it 4 times a year, and what we're trying to do is produce really high quality feed from that. So basically a bagged concentrate type analysis of forage in a bale, and it's quite easy to do. Well, yeah, it's quite easy to do, really.
And what we should have said is also at the minute is, so you said half your farm's arable, half it's grassland. At the moment, the cattle aren't grazing the arable. It's not integrated in that way, but the FYM is going back onto the arable, and obviously the red clover from this is going into your cattle. So the circle is that way. They're not just physically grazing that land.
No, these are all in arable areas. So these arable areas are very broken up. There's probably, I don't know, 6 or 8 different parcels of land that this is sort of rotated over, and fields within those parcels of land. So there's no fences, there's no water. It's really difficult to get stock onto it, really. What it lends itself to silage, where you can bring the bales away and arable after that. So at the end of those 3 years, we round that off and just drill straight into it.
Just before we move to the Brewsters, sorry, Nick, I've interrupted. I was just going to check
I'm
questions.
not. I'm just going to say there's a few questions. Yeah.
In terms of from Joe Dugdale, how do you decide when the ground conditions are right for drilling?
Oh, very good question. Basically, go and dig a hole. Everything I do now is based around whether the soil is fit to work. So last autumn, I was probably overprotective, and we could probably have gone and drilled when I didn't do. But I'm still learning about this. So yeah, just go and see how wet the soil is. That's the predominant thing. If it's too wet, go and do something else. Because we can drill so fast, if we do get a drill window, we can drill 60 acres a day without really breaking sweat.
Delightful Phil has offered anybody, he has a case 120 Maxim that is available for sale with a combi drill if anybody wants it, just for information. And a question which is also, you mentioned your neighbours, and I think it'll feature later on, but do you ever convince them, or you like the fact is that you are disrupting their thought process too?
Well, you've known me long enough, Liz, to know that I've been disrupting thought processes for quite a while with our breeding program with the cows and things. So to a lot of them, it's no great surprise. And we've been growing red clover for probably 6 or 8 years now. We've grown it before we went to see Gabe. And that took a lot of getting the head around. The contractor especially couldn't work out why we could get 4 crops of silage and not put any fertilizer on. He used to accuse me of going out in the middle of the night when it was dark and obviously spreading fertilizer then, but he's got his head around it now. So people are taking it on board, and there is more and more interest in what we're doing. Obviously with DEFRA publishing things like elms, and it looks like there's going to be something to do with no-till or less soil movement in future in whatever subsidy form that we end up with. So I think there'll be more and more interest in this, and we work closely with King Seeds, so we do quite a lot of seeds trials of cover crops for them, and they're bringing more and more farmers around to see those every year. And what we're finding is, rather than farmers just standing in the field and pretending to listen to me and waiting to go back to the pub and have a pint and a pie and a chat with the neighbours, now they're sort of coming onto the farm and asking serious questions and seriously challenging what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, what they should do, what we shouldn't do, what we learned, etc. So the attitude towards it is changing, and hopefully people are seeing what we're doing and realizing that, well, maybe it is a way forward. The biggest problem around here is that no-till got a really bad name in the 70s because sort of Simba came along with big discs and stuff, and that was going to be the way forward, and they weren't thinking about the soil biology. They were just doing min-till basically. They were probably on tractors with too small tires. They weren't looking at ground pressure, so it was a bit destined to fail really. Whereas this is a bit more of a whole rounded idea really, rather than just what no-till used to be.
Just a couple more questions. One which is, what tonnage do you think you're getting off your red clover?
Good question. Last time we measured it, we were sort of somewhere around that sort of 10-11 ton of dry matter. Yeah. Once we've just changed the load of tractor, so the idea now is to get a set of weigh scales on that. So I want to be able to measure the individual bales, and it's quite difficult to assess because the dry matter can vary tremendously in the bales or during the day when we're working. So it's quite difficult to assess what comes off, but we're trying to get a bit more of a handle on that.
And then just one point from Will Evans, which is he's going to interview Gabe soon for his podcast. If anybody's got any questions specifically for Gabe, just contact Will Evans of Rock and Roll Farming. Thanks. Sorry, Nick. Over to you.
No, well, I just want to introduce our late Irish leprechaun. Joseph, are you in the room?
As opposed to the non-Irish leprechaun.
Sorry.
We've had a terrible time, Joseph, without you.
We've been juggling balls, literally juggling balls.
This podcast is this has taken an awful turn if not that's what you're doing.
So for those who are new to this, this is Joseph, who gets quite bad hay fever, so that's why we've got the Irish leprechaun instead.
It's more due to the beard at this stage, but anyway.
Oh, the beard. So Joseph will be manning questions, and he's our muter as well. So Joseph, thank goodness you're here. Are we going to crack on with the Brewsters, Liz?
Yep. I'll put the screen back up.
So Bob and Andrew, you are my I would say you're doing mob grazing to a scale that not many are possibly doing in this country. I would say it's proper mob grazing. Can you just go back to 2012 when you read the Andre Voisin, which I can't pronounce, book, and the kind of route that led you down?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was Michael Blanche, who's a Nuffield scholar. He's got his Nuffield is about the farming ladder, and he's kind of up our way. And he gave us this book by Andre Voisin to do with rotational grazing. So then we started to read that, and then we found to try and manage grass better with a group of finishing steers. So we were strip grazing them, and then we were sort of had like 3 paddocks. We're strip grazing them across, and we started to like kind of think after a while. I was like, well, why are we focusing on just the steers when we've got the cows that are set stocked across the rest of the farm? They're not really giving us the benefit from rotational grazing. So that's kind of why we went into a mob grazing setup. So by mob grazing, I would sort of define it as getting all your cattle into one group or as little groups as possible, and that means the grass is it's far easier to manage than if you have groups of 40 cows. We just put all the cows into one group, and then in winter time we'll have cows with calves at foot, heifers, bullocks, and yearlings. Sort of fattening group and yearlings, all in one group. So sort of this winter must be like 400 animals and 600 animals in one group.
Wow.
Everything other than bulls are wintered in one group.
Yeah.
Whereas in the summertime we'd have cows and calves in one group and young growing stock in another group.
Yeah, so we just read one book, and then that really opened up our eyes, and it's kind of gone quite extreme since then. A bit.
I think what we did notice with Andre Voisin was in an organic system, the grass was running out of steam after maybe 2 or 3 rotations, whereas that's why we discovered with the mob grazing, we actually grazed far fewer times, but actually had far longer rest periods. We would actually grow far more forage, and it would we weren't getting such bothers with worm burdens when we went to these long rest periods. The cattle would eat everything, whereas when you're doing quick rotations of maybe 21 days, the cattle will actually avoid their dung pats or where they've been the previous time. So there's all this biology going on under the ground that we were maybe only just starting to sort of see by sort of questioning what we're doing or looking at it differently. And then I suppose I think we saw a lot of YouTube stuff about mob grazing, and that's probably why we went down that route, whereas there was sort of a drive in Scotland to sort of, with QMS, to go down more the New Zealand style grazing, New Zealand style of rotational grazing, whereas we sort of became aware that we could actually build soil with cattle with these long rest periods and change this sort of sward diversity by extending the rest periods, and actually started seeing a lot of herbs popping up in some old pastures, sort of yarrows and plantains, that they must have always been there, but we just never gave them the chance to grow. So we got really excited by it, and there's lots of sort of ecological benefits off the back of it as well, in terms of, I think we're seeing far more farm birds and dung beetles and worms and all sorts of stuff, and it's really quite exciting.
So how tall are the covers that you're going into? How long are they getting? Oh, there we go. Quite long.
Yeah, so the top left photo, that's kind of ideally what would go into sort of peak summer. But with cows and calves, what we would try and do is a non-selective form. So that's basically just getting the cows to take everything in the field, so that the cows can manage that diet. But if you're trying to finish cattle on grass, you really need to give them selective grazing. So that's kind of more, I wouldn't say set stocking, but they can cream off the best grasses. But with cows, it's far better to do a non-selective version of it.
What we maybe never said as well, we've experimented with moving cattle at different intervals, but what we find is moving them once a day is probably the ultimate. It's the best for the cattle, and it's best for the stockman as well. Whereas before, we'd move cattle even up to 3 times a day to try and build soils, and we just couldn't really get the cattle to settle on that, and it was very labour intensive as well. Whereas some people as well, mob grazing, the same, maybe as long as you move the cattle every 3 days, they're not getting the chance to graze the regrowth, but I think we would strongly believe in moving cattle once a day at the same time every day. And the cat, you can also, it just becomes a routine then for both the people and the cattle. And the picture in the bottom right shows the quad bike that we've adapted to lay out electric fences, and on the back's a carrier for pigtail posts with these plastic alkaline pipes sticking up to hold pigtail posts. And the drive-over kit, as we call it, is the 50mm alkaline pipe that runs up the quad bike. That allows us to drive over these single-wire fences that we put up. So that was sort of made the whole thing far faster for us in that you could set up a 100-meter fence in probably about a minute and a half. And now the farm is actually, almost all the farm is divided into 100-meter wide lanes. So there's just a single wire fence is 100 meters wide, and we run temporary fences between these 100-meter wide lanes. So it's almost like putting the rungs on a ladder, if you will, and the cattle just march up and down these lanes.
Can you is that a useful picture to show it, or not quite?
That is.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so sorry. The photo of that's me, that good-looking guy there. That's you can start to see where the cows are grazing. They're 100-meter wide lanes. So that photo was taken spring last year. So what we've started to trial and error with is pasture cropping. So that photo that I'm standing in, that's actually forage rye. So we drilled that straight into grass in October 2018 with a contractor. The contractor did all the work. We just field, and then just before we went to drill, we grazed off all the grass with the cattle as well as we drilled in the forage rye, and then we stopped it with sheep to try and re-graze any grass after growth. And actually, it was a really good crop of rye we got from it. We're absolutely chuffed. So we've drilled a few more this last October. We drilled a lot more acres of rye, but it's not been as successful. But we're just lucky we had the success the first year. We probably wouldn't try it again. And then the photo in the top left, that's actually spring oats and beans that we drilled. That was the start of middle of March. We drilled that. We actually bought a Moore Uni drill the same as Mike's, so I'm chuffed he's part of my Moore Uni drill group. But I was needing to ask his advice how to drive it straight. I certainly can't drive it as the pace.
And to clarify, with your pasture cropping, you're taking that to grazing height, aren't you? And some bales, but you're not taking it to cereals. It's just about a forage boost. Yeah,
sorry, a whole crop. That's kind of what we're interested in. Is just try and grow as much forage as possible, whether we whole crop it or graze it as a standing crop. And that's kind of what we're wanting to do more of, is grazing rye at that sort of height and get the soil benefits from it. And then while we're grazing that field, then the rest of the farm we're letting that rest, and then we'll hopefully have a far larger grass stockpile going into the winter, and we can carry more cattle. That's kind of our plan.
So if we just go back to the cows, what I find interesting is you have your mob of 200 cows, and then the calves stay with them until is it March? So you're spring calving, yeah.
Yeah, so we calve in May, so it's quite late. But the reason we do that is it means going into winter time, you don't need to feed the cows as much, and they're carrying a calf over winter, so the calf isn't weaned off and needing special feeding. He's on a very basic maintenance ration. And then 2 months before calving time, that's when the grass starts to come, so then the cow can then put on body condition. So it's quite a sort of low cost way of raising cattle.
Yeah.
And it's down to sort of genetics. So this cow in the picture, that's actually Curly, kind of one of the favourite cows on the farm. So if they all looked as good as her, we'd be winning. But it's a slow process to get cows as good as that.
And the base genetics is sort of Angus Hereford cross, really.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So Liz, should we just talk a little bit about the breeding?
Just before we move on, We
yeah,
might just
leprechauns.
answer, one or two questions. The first one: what time do you move the cattle? Have you, do you move them today?
Well, I know a lot of the sort of experts talk about moving them in the afternoon when the sugars are better in the grass, but we just like to get out, move the cows, and just in the morning and just see where we're at and what's going on. Where I wouldn't like to, get on with your day a bit doing it that way. But each their own.
And then in terms, you've already answered the drill question, so that's good. We do one. Do you routinely worm cattle / fecal egg count? And have you noticed in your young stock worm burdens reducing because you're using higher covers and mowing frequently?
Yeah, we worm the yearlings if we have to. So we look at their kind of the weights once they're weaned and decide how to play it from there. But like the cows, no cow, we don't worm any mature stock, just the young growing stock. But this is actually ties in for genetics because we started to breed our own bulls, and we keep our own heifer replacements anyway. But we started to breed our own bulls, which are kind of a composite breed between Herefords and Anguses. And part of the benefits of breeding our own bulls is we can try and breed for resistance to parasites. So none of the bulls we keep, we worm, and then we soon sort of see which ones thrive underneath that system, and then keep those bulls, and then from there produce more bulls, and hopefully we'll get to a stage where we're kind of not needing any wormer. But we'll see. We've done this technique with the sheep, and we know it works with the sheep, so we're fairly confident it'll work with the cattle. Yeah.
I think it. Sorry.
No, sorry, just on the bulls. How many bulls do you put with your cows?
There's probably about 20 bulls we put with the cows in one group at bulling time, but they're younger bulls we use. There's either yearling bulls or 2-year-old bulls, so that there's far less fighting and there's less risk of injury that way. But there's also they can't cover as many cows, these young bulls. I think the recommended rate sort of a yearling bull can maybe manage 15 cattle over a 6-week period, so plenty of bulls, and the dominant genetics sort of serve the most cattle as well, so that's a bit of evolution, a bit of evolution as well.
And just the last one for now, do you outwinter?
Yes, everything's outwintered. There's no stalker brought inside. Only if there's sort of a problem, you come in and get TLC, but not no, everything's outside and everything's forage reared. There's no grain fed whatsoever.
Could you just explain a little bit about your bale grazing?
Yeah, did I send you guys a photo of that? I can't remember, but
I don't think you did.
No, I didn't. So
I don't think so.
No.
No.
Yeah, so we basically we when we cut a field of silage, we leave the bales in the field where they're standing, and then because they're already in the lanes, we'll just give the cows a ration of 12 bales a day. Say, I think that's kind of what average this year. So we just go in, cut open the plastic with the tractor and take off the net, and then just move the bale slightly to get all the plastic away, and then it's just like mob grazing but with bales as well.
So we'd go maybe once a week and peel sort of 60 or 70 bales in one go. So that's sort of the hard work for the week, and the rest of the week's just moving electric fences and a water trough. Everything's portable water troughs, so it's pretty easy peasy. We don't even use ring feeders now. We used to use ring feeders, but we found it was hard work and we're quite lazy. But actually, it's far more solid damage done using ring feeders because the cattle actually sort of bore into a ring feeder and dig with their front feet, whereas not using the ring feeders actually there's far less poaching. There will be a percentage of the bale wasted, but it's very little.
Just Mike's got a question for the Brewsters. So Mike, I don't know whether you want to ask your question or questions.
Yeah, just wondering what sort of overall stocking rates you've got up there, and what sort of growth rates you're expecting from the young stock from your calves.
The stocking rates, well, it's sort of the 200 cattle over sort of the 900 acres, and that's carrying all the stock through to finishing. What that is a number I don't know in terms of livestock units. In growth rates, what we found we do a lot of weighing the cattle at grass, and they actually the growth rates vary so much throughout the year. Even we sort of in the early summer with yearlings, we can get up to sort of 1.5 kilos live weight gain per day. In 2-year-olds at that time, we can easily get over 2 kilos a day. But a part of that will be compensatory gain. But what we found is that they never flatline. Because I remember when we first started weighing cattle, I used to think, great, these cattle are growing at 1.5 kilos a day, and then you'd sort of calculate what you expected them to weigh at the end of the summer, and it was nothing like it because it's such peaks and troughs. Especially, they won't grow much through the winter at all, I wouldn't have thought. Or they'll grow frame, the young stock, but they won't necessarily put on much weight. So it's very hard to quantify.
I think the other thing I'd just add is if you Joel Salton talked to me about this, or spoke at this thing when I was listening to him, and he was talking about how if you're trying to if profitability is down to the way you finish a cow, then you just have 10 cows on your farm, and then they'd grow really well, but you need to sort of put it back to per hectare. Is how many kilos of meat do you produce per hectare? And that's kind of on the other side of the seesaw to individual growth rates, where fair enough to finish cattle, you need to have them sort of more of a selective grazing, but I think for cheap, low cost production of grass-fed beef, then you need to go to more of a non-selective grazing system.
But we've sort of got two systems on the farm in that we've got the rearing and then we've also got the finishing. So it's in the winter time, it's very much a maintenance diet, whereas in the summertime, we're trying to finish the young stock and the growing stock, give them the best chance to grow. Whereas like of a mature cow, she'll actually run on pretty low quality forage as long as you get her in good enough condition. And you're calving in sync with nature in terms of calving at the start of the summer. They'll sort of keep themselves right. Sort of try to copy nature really to a large extent, in that you can run a bit of back fat off them, burn off flesh in the winter time, provided you can put it back on pre-calving.
Just kind of relating back to that, just there's a few questions coming in. With your finishers then, are you doing kind of a leader follower system, or are they kind of on a separate platform?
Yeah, I suppose you could call it leader follower, but the cows might be following them 60 days or could be 100 days after where the yearlings have been. Yeah, so we kind of have
slow to follow.
Yeah, very simple to like the New Zealand system.
And then just kind of on the numbers, do you kind of know your calf weaned per 100 bulled? Do you have any numbers around 200 day weights, or kind of, you mentioned you do kilograms per hectare? Do you have finish weights and your average age, just kind of general?
Yeah, so we'll sort of finish cattle they'll be about 550 kilos, and then they'll be 27 months old or thereabouts. And then sort of weaning weights will be 250 kilos, I think. Sort of average about 250 kilos at 12 months old. But I know it doesn't sound very impressive, but then you weigh them 3 months later, being just off grass, just after on between 12 and 15 months. That's where they have massive growth rates. That's where you get all your gains. It's like 3 months of the year, a cat under our system, the cat will actually do really well. But that's kind of all I really want to say about that.
We're a bit more muck and magic than sort of measuring stuff.
And then probably the just quick two for now. How do you work your sheep in with the cattle?
Yes, if you asked me that about 2 years ago, I'd say sell all the sheep because they just ruin grass. But now I've realised they ruin grass, and because we're trying to get into pasture cropping, I'm actually wanting to put the sheep numbers up again. So that's the sheep are more of the sheep and the bulls. They get more kind of blocks of weeks at a week or 2 weeks at a time, a very loose rotation. But it's it works fine. So we've got these rougher areas, like rougher hills that we can just put them on and move them about, and it's easy enough. I don't really want to have to get into fencing sheep into blocks of land and moving them every day because they're a menace.
And do you calf your cows in rotation?
Well, So what we do is, at the moment, we're calving at the moment. So we're sort of giving the cows about half a hectare of they're on really lush cockswood grass, and then we're supplementing them with oat straw. So we'll just move the cows every day. So I'm like out in the morning at 6 in the morning. I'll check if there's any cows and calves and that, and I'll give the cows a fresh bank of grass, and then I'll flick out the cows that have calved into a different group, and then they're kind of in these smaller groups of kind of 20 or 40 for a couple of weeks until the calves are a bit stronger. Then we just start to bunch them up, and then that's us starting to get grazing again, moving them every day and back fencing them.
Cool. So I think the last one the last one for now is someone is wondering, do you write any checks, or do you write many checks?
Still too many. Not as big as the check they're going to write for our interview tonight.
Yeah.
We've agreed we'll buy you some pints at Carbon Forum.
You can put as many zeros as you like in it. Just don't put anything before the decimal point.
But is it a good time in terms of, Mike? Do you mean I appreciate the cattle systems are quite different in terms of how you run them, but you also are aiming to breed the right cow for your system, aren't you?
Yes, very much. Historically we were crossing South Devons with Limousin's to produce what we call our red cows. So we have a number of pedigree South Devons, pure South Devons on the farm. We're all AI with no stock bulls at all. So we're just looking for the best genetics that we could find, really. We were conscious of our cow size was getting a bit too big and wanted to make it more efficient. So we looked around 3 years ago to see what we could do. And the breed that we sort of settled on was not really what you call a beef breed, which is Norwegian Reds. So we're now putting Norwegian Reds on the South Devons, reduced our cow size, boosted the milk, seemed to graze very well, grow unbelievably quickly, and seem to be doing very well. So we've calved a number last year we calved them at 2 years old, calved them last year to Angus for the first time, and this year we've calved them to the blue. We've calved 17, I think, this time. Haven't assisted any of them. Half of those are blues, no problems at all. We've just been dehorning the calves today, so we've been through, I don't know, about 70 odd today and dehorned them. The Norwegian Reds out of South Devons are standing 4 inches taller than the blues at the moment. All right, they're a different shape. They're not as muscly, but they are growing extremely quickly. We use female sex semen, but we have a couple of bulls this year, and they are just off like rockets. I would have thought at the moment, by weaning time, we'll be looking at 1.6, 1.8 kilos a day from those guys, and that's just on grass and milk from the cows. So our grazing regime is 2-day moves, keeping it really tight, grass and white clover in the grazing regime. But the breeding program, we've looked at various other breeds. We've tried Wagyus, Charolais, other terminal breeds, Coulard Charolais, and we sort of keep coming back to the blues because they're the ones that really give us the money at the end of the day. So I'm aiming the bulls at a 400 kilo carcass, U plus or better. So maximising the income and maximising bonuses from it.
And because you're keeping your bulls in, aren't you, and then finishing them. And and that red clover is coming in terms of that finishing bull diet as well.
Yeah, so the bulls are basically on ad lib red clover, and they have a hopper with home produced rolled barley and beans as well. So beans that we produce ourselves. So the only checks that we write for the cattle now are a little bit of molasses, probably 1,000 litres of molasses a year. Minerals, in-feed minerals for the bulls, boluses for the cows, and AI really.
Just on the cattle, and apologise if this was asked before I joined, but following your visit to the States, have you changed your grazing practices?
No, I was already heading towards, well, I don't know what you call it, techno grazing or quite which tag you put on it, but we were already heading towards that. We'd already looked at that in quite detail over here, particularly talking to local dairy farmers that are are really into their grassland management. So really learning from the dairy farmers and the guys that are really on it, moving them every 6 hours or at least 2 paddocks a day each milking. So we learnt that from there really. Gabe's running a very similar system to the Roosters really, in terms of he's putting them into very large thick covers, very tall covers. His idea being that he wanted them to graze a third, eat a third, trample a third and leave a third. So that's how he was improving his soil. But I'm limited on acreage here and I can't do that type of thing. We can improve the soil with the grassland and the management we're using. So it wasn't really the states that really took us down that road.
So there's just a few quick ones kind of on the cattle and calves. So what age do you wean your calves at?
So basically we start calving 10th of March. We finished last weekend, so 8 weeks. Everything's out at grass all summer, and we will literally wean them when we bring them in. If we get chance, we'll fence wean them before we bring them in a fortnight beforehand. Take some of the stress out of it. So basically we've got a big hedge, 2 electric fences, one either side of the hedge. Put the calves on one side and the cows on the other. They bull each other for 24 hours and the cows wander off and start grazing, and we put a ring feeder at the top end of the field and the calves will start to come away from the hedge and come back up there. So we just wean them then basically. In terms of weights, I can't remember off the top of my head. I know that last year the heifers did 1.42 kilos of live weight gain a day and the bulls were just short of 1.5 kilos. I think this one like 1.48 a day. And that was off grass and milk, so no creep feed. And that was taking the birth weight off as well. So
just a few kind of, well, we'll call them quick fire. Fat cover on bulls, any issue when finishing?
Can be sometimes. Bulls out of, we have some, we also keep the Angus heifers. They're a useful cow as well. With the traditional breeds and certainly with the Norwegian Reds, we have no problems with putting the fat cover on. Sometimes with the blues, we've tended to go away from the blues that gave us issues with that.
And then mature cow weights, roughly, what are your?
Probably sort of 680, 700 kilos at the moment on average. But we've got quite a young herd, so that would go up if you kept them for too long.
And how much do your, we're getting there, how much does your how much home mix per bull consume?
I'll tell you better when I get this load away and sorted out. We've just built a new farmstead and been doing a huge amount of planning stuff, trying to sell the old farmstead and various things over the last 4 or 5 years. So I haven't been measuring it as tight as we should do. Last time we did some figures with Eblex, which is a few years ago with Mary Vickers, we were just under 6-to-1 feed conversion, so they were pretty efficient, really.
And the last one for now, do you measure grass covers in your grazing?
Yes, have been doing with plate meters a while ago. So I've got, I wouldn't say my eye is perfectly calibrated, but I have a pretty good idea of where covers are. I've not tended to measure and monitor as well as I should have been doing because of all this planning stuff we've been doing. But that's one of the goals for this year, is to get back onto that so properly and get a better understanding of what I've got out there, whether I can start to push the cow numbers up. But given the fact that we haven't had any rain since 20th of February, we're just struggling for grass a bit at the moment.
Cheers.
Sorry, go on, Liz.
No, my question was going to be ironic after the lack of rainfall, so you go first.
Okay, so Brewster Brothers, I'm quite I'm very envious that you've been organic all your lives, and
all my life, a lot older.
Oh, I wasn't sure who was the oldest. If so, I'm just conscious that you've never known anything different. And a lot of us are playing catch up, whether it's not going the whole hog and going organic, just being more regenerative, I suppose. So we talked today, Andrew, about Joel, and he said the 1 to 5 thing. Can you just talk through that? Because I think it illustrates it quite well.
Yeah, it's sort of like just a mindset, really. Is kind of if someone's kind of raised in the conventional mainstream agriculture, they're not going to jump to like a really extreme kind of low cost organic system. Hippie style with our hemp pants, apparently. Apparently that's what we were told. But they sort of take a little step. So that's kind of like they might go to like some sort of rotational grazing, and then no one's going to change their ways overnight. It takes years. Like it's taken us years to go from just being cows all the time outwintered and kind of sort of traditional upland farm that was organic, and then it's taken us years to go to like a totally different mob grazing setup, even though they're quite similar in some ways.
Because I'm just imagining your place to be fairly alive with, like you mentioned before, butterflies and birds, and I suppose that's just the norm for you. And soon you're going to be have dung beetle people there. But yeah, it's I suppose it's just normal for you, and we're maybe trying to catch up. Mike, can we talk about your I'm not going to say it, your water in your fields? Not what we talked about.
I think she's trying to say, how are you? No, I can't even say it now. Are you working with Yorkshire Water? Not that this is at all set up as a question.
I thought Stuart wanted to talk about damp patches like Stuart.
Oh no, I was going to say it. I couldn't say wet patch.
Yeah, so there's a business called Sensitive Farming that's based around York, and they've introduced us to Yorkshire Water. Basically, Yorkshire Water have two major problems. One, flooding, particularly in York, which is a bottleneck, and secondly, water quality. So, and in particular, soil and pesticide runoff. And they've got to get this stuff out of the water before they can purify it and then get it back into the pipes for us guys to drink. So they've been very interested in what we're doing because of the infiltration rates that we can achieve. So of all the land around here this autumn, a lot of it was, there's a lot of potatoes, carrots, maize, water was just running out those fields and standing anywhere where they've been and managed to get the crops out. Any cereals that were put in after that, or just conventionally, the soil ran together, so there was either ponding or just runoff. So runoff creates flooding and the issues with water quality. Our no-till fields were the only fields in this area, in the parish, really, in the surrounding area, that had no water stood in them. So our water just goes straight into the ground. Two benefits for Yorkshire Water. One, no flooding, because it probably takes it 10 days or a fortnight to get down through the soil profile into the drains and into the system. And secondly, there's no runoff. So there's no soil in the water. It's really clean. And I didn't take a picture of it. I should have done. Our next door neighbour's field was running down the road during the winter, probably February, March time. The drains were running fairly hard under the field that was next door, that was ours. And it looked like it was coming out as clean as you could possibly imagine, and sort of totally drinkable just as it was. Secondly, we've stopped using insecticides and slug pellets, haven't used those for 5 years since I came back from Gabe's. No seed treatments either on the cereal seed. So all these things, again, help to keep all of the extremely expensive things to clean out of the water for Yorkshire Water.
Yep. Mike, just keeping on a kind of risky, watery theme, can you just share with us when you were in the bath listening to Gabe, what did he say?
You'll have to go with my memory on that one.
Well, he said every morning he gets out of bed.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it was one of his podcasts or one of his lectures, and he said he's now got to the stage where he wakes up on a morning and tries to work out how he can keep things alive, how he can increase the biodiversity on his farm, in the soils, everywhere, above and below ground. Whereas he used to wake up in the morning thinking, okay, what am I going to kill today? Is it a fungus? Is it a disease? Is it a pest? Is it a weed? And he said, so he's had a total sort of flip round in that respect. And I suppose we're sort of doing the same things. We're still using herbicides, not using insecticides, like I said, or seed treatments. So we're using less, we're putting less and less chemical pressure on the ground. and things like fertilizer. We're using more sulfur, which is good for the ground, and we're splitting the fertilizer sort of 3 or 4 times on the cereals, so we're not putting a huge amount of ammonium nitrate and ammonium sulfates on the ground at one time, which helps to buffer the the land and the soil biology.
Yeah, no, I think it's really good.
And I suppose also the bit that we're sort of linking through around, which is this, a part of this, which is about that social element, isn't it? Which is so, when you went, evidenced by the feet in the picture, you went to America with quite a lot of people who are also interested in that soil journey.
Yeah.
So how do you continue to be connected with them, and how do you do that? And because you're not
there
getting
there they are.
Oh, there we go. You're not getting the
there we go.
support from your neighbours, are you? So it's, I think all the similarity with a lot of people on these sort of calls is that they're disruptive and they're not getting support from their local community, are they? So it's they having to find other places to go and find that information.
Yeah, you won't do. There are a few no-tillers in this area, but they're sort of playing with it a little bit. Having said that, there's the likes of David Blacker who aren't playing with it and very serious. They're only 5 or 6 miles across the other side of the river at Shipton from us. So there are guys you can learn from, but it's not like there's lots and lots of you. You're quite spread out. The Yorkshire Water have brought a number of us together, David and another group of farmers sort of in this area, and we're learning a lot more as time goes on. But there's quite a lot of the people on that photograph were all members of BASE, and that's where there's an awful lot of information available, and also no-till forums, and there's a no-till forum connected with the farming forum, which is really useful. So there's an awful lot of places to learn stuff, and obviously the likes of Groundswell as well. Direct Drilling magazine, really, really good. Lots of really fantastic technical articles, lots and lots to learn in there. But most of all, the important thing is to learn to look at what you're seeing, if that makes sense, and try and understand what you're seeing, what impact you're having on your soils, and learn to. It's a change of mindset. Learn to see what impact you're having and learn from that and change again in the future. So a lot of things that we've learned here over a period of time.
Just a few quick questions, just conscious time, we'll try and get through most of them. Like, what is your thoughts on the importance of glyphosate to a no-till system?
Also known as glyphosate.
Yeah, Roundup.
Well, when you can learn to pronounce chagas, you can take it back.
No, children, agree. Yeah, it is important to us if we, as has been amply demonstrated from the pictures that we're looking at before, it is possible to drill a rye into a grass field and make it work. So we will find a way to make it work. Cover crop annihilation, maybe have to flail it off, which is, I know, is time, machinery, and money, but if that's what it takes, that cover crop and that soil armor is really important to me. We will find ways around it, crimper rollers, whatever, for crop destruction. But as time goes on, it will be a challenge, but it's not a challenge I think that will beat us.
So this last one, have you done any slake tests and infiltration tests? Compare them with your neighbours?
I haven't done. We should do. We were looking at slake tests in America, and I've got some video somewhere of when we were with. It wasn't with Gabe. Who was it with? I can't think now. Anyway, Jay Fiora, that was it. He does a really good demonstration of that. So I know what it's all about, and yes, we could sort of have the same effects, really. I think infiltration tests, we haven't measured it as such. We've taken this new piece of land we've taken on this year. It'd be interesting to do some infiltration tests on that, and some of our no-till ground that's been in no-till for a number of years, and possibly look at infiltration after 3 years of the red clover compared to the arable land, things like this. So there's lots of things we can do. I just need the time to do it, really.
I'm surprised we didn't get the question of asking why Gabe didn't question what you were doing in his bathtub. But we have
No, he was in the bath. No, oh shut up.
I was in the,
I'll mute you.
I was in the bathtub, not Gabe.
Right, there we go.
Gabe was not in the room. It was not Gabe's bathtub. It's fine.
This is how rumors start. We have a few questions for the Brewsters. If we'll throw them over. Just look. How do you actually market your cattle, and what do you think of native breed schemes?
Yeah, so well, we get a premium for our cattle fruit just for organic, so they just go to the sort of supermarket, which isn't very exciting. But that's something we would really like to do, is to try and find kind of work more with local butcheries or cattle than going into the abattoir, because they don't really suit the type of cattle that we produce. But the quality, the eating quality of our beef is absolutely brilliant. So we butcher our own beasts and put them in the freezer, and they're second to none really. And native breeds, well, we get the organic premium, so that's usually higher than like the native Angus premium.
With then your calves, do you DNA test your calves to work out which sires are dominant?
No, we just let nature decide, and that's kind of all we do.
Us making filling up the passports fun.
It's about the sire.
It's all about the sire. I think there's one or two just coming in now. Have you thought, or have either of you, I suppose, thought about looking at the nutrient density of your beef? But I suppose you're just starting to think about that.
We're starting to think about it. I've read a lot of articles from the States suggesting that in the future we'll actually have apps on our mobile phones that'll be able to beam food, just sort of scan it with our phone, and that'll tell us our nutrient density of things in the supermarket even, which could really change consumer habits fairly radically overnight if that happens. But I wonder if the food industry would like that to happen. I'm not sure. So will it happen? But Joel Salatin's trying to speak to it a lot. He thinks it will happen.
And just the last one for now. Just so big open fields. Does the big herd in winter help to shelter each other when grazing?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, no, we do see that. Although we do try and provide shelter in the winter if we know that there's bad weather coming in from, you know, what direction it's coming from. We can usually get them along a bank of trees or something to try and help. But the herd definitely does provide shelter for themselves as well. But it's probably the dominant animals probably get themselves stuck on the inside. Poor timid beasts are on the provide the shelter.
Cheers, thank you.
Can I just ask Bob and Andrew? Can you just tell us a little bit about the WhatsApp group, the international WhatsApp group, and also just you went to college, and then you came back from college and started watching YouTube.
Yeah.
So can you answer those two questions in a one-er?
We'll try. Yeah. So, well, we wanted to get into pasture cropping, following YouTube videos when we heard about pasture crop in Australia, and we just had to try it. But we didn't really know much about arable malark, so then we decided to start a WhatsApp group and get some arable farmers locally and some guys I knew out in Canada. And before we knew it, we had like 30 farmers, and it's still going strong. So that was for a WhatsApp group for pasture cropping. So I learned a lot from that, and then we started a mob grazing pasture cropping group. Mob grazing WhatsApp group for anyone that's interested in that, which they can find out about that on our website, mobgrazing.co.uk. So it's kind of changed. Unfortunately, it's no longer you're speaking with your neighbours. It's like everything's online, and that's kind of just the way it's gone, unfortunately. But in a way, WhatsApp's a really good tool for us to use to learn from things. What was the other question?
We talked about the on the other call before. We talked about the particular people you latched onto on YouTube. Was it Zeterman or Johan?
Johan, yeah.
Yeah, so Johan Zeitsman. There's loads of them actually. We found our probably favourites maybe Johan Zeitsman. He was a big Zimbabwean rancher whose family, I think they ran tens of thousands of cattle in Zimbabwe before I think they got driven off the land, and now he's sort of more involved in the consultancy side of things. So he's sort of written a really good book about cattle and in terms of he started off with Alan Savory as well. So he when the sort of Savory techniques came into Africa, he adopted them. But where Savory sort of didn't know much about cattle, Johann Zietsman was really a cattleman who observed cattle and sort of knew all about the cattle husbandry side of things. So he sort of spreaded the knowledge about that and catalogued looking after the cattle's requirements in a mob grazing system, and also using the stock to really build soil fertility on a landscape scale. So he's sort of one of the favourites, and we always like to promote him because we don't think he's well enough heard of in this country. But sort of also love all the obvious ones, whether it's Joel Sallant or Greg Judy and guys like this. But there's so much on YouTube, and that's probably what's made me realise I wasted 4 years at college. When I could
So did you do anything about this at college?
No, definitely not. It's college. My 4 honours degree in agriculture was what I call post-war agriculture. It was just put on something out of a bag and yield is king.
Oh, it's sad, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. And I'm just conscious of you two got the brothers and Mike. Have you got anything you want to say to each other? Because Liz has gone somewhere.
I'm still here.
Liz? Oh,
still here.
Still. Is there anything you'd like to say to each other? Any questions?
Maybe not to Mike, but Gabe Brown's got a really good book, so that's well worth everyone to read it if they haven't read it before. But I'm very envious that Mike actually got out to see him in person. So
I'd like to ask Mike if he's seen a colour change in his soils. Like, are you seeing your soils getting blacker as years go by?
Yes, definitely, without a doubt. We're seeing a change in the colour of the soils, but more obvious is the change in the soil biology. So the worms, the beetles, the symphylids, things like this. The change is quite rapid. It was one of the American soil specialists, I can't remember who it was, said if you provide them with a house and food, they will come, and they do. We've looked at some fairly horrendously damaged pan soils in Cambridgeshire and down in the southeast, where they reckon there's 30 harvests left. They are still, redeemable. They can be sorted out. Just provide the soil biology with somewhere to live, a structure to live in, and some food, and they will come pretty quickly, without a doubt.
I'm conscious of time, so there's probably 2 last questions. One for you, Mike. Your red clover mix, what percentage is the makeup, and do you apply any P and K throughout the season after silage cuts? Yeah, so there'll be about 3, off the top of my head, about 3 kilos of red clover, usually a couple of different varieties, in with the ABBA high sugar ryegrasses. So we're trying to produce like a balanced diet, if you like, in a bale. And in terms of P and K, no, don't tend to put it on when we're growing the red clover. The challenge of the red clover is to get sulfur into it. We're in quite a sulfur deficient area here, so we have used sulfur plus potash in the past. But really, we're looking to rotate the muck around the farm all the time, and produce more and more FYM to recycle it all. So we haven't bought any phosphate onto the farm for probably 10 years, and probably only, I don't know, 3 or 4 ton of muriate of potash over the last 5 years. At the moment, our indices seem to be stable. Our pHs are going up. We don't have anaerobic conditions. We don't seem to have to use as much micronutrients on the cereals as well. So nowhere near as much manganese as we used to use, things like this. The soils do seem to be healthier, and there's more available nutrition in those soils, which should, in theory, lead to, as you were talking about before, a more nutrient-dense food. And that was one of the big things that Gabe was talking about. So the beef that he produced, where he is at Bismarck, there's 2 of, as I understand, there's 2 of America's leading cancer research hospitals there. And the hospitals
recommend Gabe's foods as part of the recovery plan for their patients because it is much more nutrient dense and hasn't got any pesticides, insecticides, etc. in it. So he's selling that as a premium, and he says he can't meet the demand. It's absolutely massive. So that's a slight aside there.
I'm conscious of time, so I'll probably ask these last two questions, and I think we're probably running out. So for the Brewsters, do you use sacrifice paddocks over winter for bales, or are you able to keep the rotation throughout the whole grazing platform through winter without too much poaching?
No, it is a bit of a hit or miss. We do get a bit of poaching, and that's kind of where the pasture cropping's coming into, is we're drilling in annuals after where the cows have been, is the plan. So that's kind of how we recover the paddocks.
What we find is you can actually do quite a lot of poaching. It's amazing how it recovers. So you're constantly back fencing, whereas if your cattle were in an area for even a week, it's actually far too long. Whereas one day you can come out in the morning after a wet night and you think, what a mess we've made, but it'll actually recover remarkably well if the cattle are only there for 24 hours.
The last question, I think, for the night can go to Liz. Can sheep work with the mob grazing system?
Sorry, Joseph, I didn't hear you.
I said, can sheep, or you weren't paying attention, can sheep work with the mob grazing system?
I think it's for the I think the challenge, which is the Brewsters have alluded to, which is it's a sward height debate, isn't it? Which is their grazing behaviour just isn't as effective as cattle at dealing with those high sward heights. So, but then there must be people out there doing mob grazing with sheep. It's just how tall is how tall is the tall grass in those systems? That didn't answer your question.
It wasn't my question, but I think it was a good attempt.
Thanks.
Are we done, Joseph, with questions?
Sorry, I think that's all the questions at the moment.
Okay. Liz, I'm just conscious of time.
Yep.
Haven't they been marvellous guests?
They've been marvellous. We've let the side down many times. They have been wonderful.
Thank you both, all three of you, so much. It's just so good. So I'm just conscious of your website, Brewster Brothers. Should I send everyone a link with it tomorrow on, or is it easy to remember? It is quite easy, isn't it?
Yeah, mobgrazing.co.uk, but no, you're more than welcome to send a link to people.
Andrew might get his spelling mistakes sorted if you send a link.
Yeah, Mum's working on the spelling mistakes as we speak. So.
Okay.
And the other two things to point out is that we have got that, if you want to listen to the previous two again, or for the first time, they are on the YouTube channel called Carbon Calling, so do Google search that. And we've also pulled out the audio for the first two, and they're on, you can get them as a podcast too. So with the mobgrazing.co.uk links, we'll also send out how to get onto those if you want to listen to them again. And this one will be up shortly, but not that quick.
So in 2 weeks' time, it's Dung Beetle Fest. We've got to think of a name for it. And then
who gives a shit about dung beetles? I thought we'd agreed this.
Well, I'm not sure. And then, so that's in 2 weeks. And then, because I'm thinking lockdown might have eased and you might all not be quite so bored, we might then go monthly. We might go international. So yeah, we will be here after Dung Beetles, but maybe not fortnightly. That's the plan. Are we done?
And yeah, and two things, which is a plea for sort of contacts. What I'm really interested in is also meeting or speaking to more women that are involved in regenerative ag. So if you know anybody that isn't on these calls, please can you send me or both of us the details. And also, as sort of that last question alluded to, which is really interested in people who are managing sheep under these sort of systems as well. So if you can think of, if it's yourself or if you think of anybody else that you think would be good to have a chat to, please send their contacts through to us. Thank you.
So thank you very much.
We shall see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Mhm.